Hi, everyone. In this next part, I'm going to talk about a couple things with Unity, including materials, lighting, and camera. Okay. Now, hopefully, the concept of materials is kind of ringing bells because this is something we talked about. Hopefully, you talked about it in Blender, and hopefully, you talked about it in 427 with Unity. But even if you didn't, you might remember that in Blender. So right now, I have this gray cube, right? That I think of it as like this, it's made of clay, right? And clay by itself is this gray white thing, and maybe we want to paint it like red or something. That would be a material. So if I was in Blender, I can click on materials. Let's pretend I didn't have a material, and I could make a new material. And let's call it, red material. And we could set basically the properties of how light would bounce off of this object. So this included things like color. So if I was in rendered mode, you can see now that I'm seeing this. We could see how this is metallic and roughness, which is basically metallic is how shiny an object, roughness is how pinpointed light bounces off of something. And we can even do things like, make this a checkerboard or bring in an image, right? We could do the same thing in Unity. Okay, so in this I'm going to show you guys how to make various types of materials in Unity. So let's go to the materials tab, and what I'm going to do is make a new material from scratch. I'm going to right click right in this window, and I'm going to go to create material. You could also click on this little plus sign, material. Okay, I'm going to call this material, let's call it blue material. Okay. So you can see I have this gray material, and this has kind of changed a little bit since earlier versions of Unity. So if you haven't used Unity in maybe a year or two, this might look a little different. We used to have a kind of shader, which is how the thing generates or algorithm figures out the lighting. This is now referred to as a universal render pipeline, as before it was referred to as a standard. Before it might have looked like this. This is kind of the new sort of default universal render pipeline. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the color. So this is the surface. So right now it's kind of set to white. Okay. What I'm going to do is click on this, and this is a color picker. And we're supposed to make this blue. So I'm going to set this to blue, like a dark blue. Okay. And you can see now that this is a dark blue. Okay. And metallic map would allow me to make this a little bit more shinier. Think of it as kind of like, you can see here how there's like light bouncing off of the aluminum of this can here, or maybe the shininess of this back of this old school CD or something like that. That's what metallic basically is like how reflective is the object. We could also play around with smoothness. You can see with a high smoothness, this has become really pinpointed light. The kind of way I describe it is it's kind of like chrome, or like a nice shiny chrome bumper on a fancy car, like especially an old school kind of like has that kind of reflectiveness. This is if you wanted it kind of more of a matte where it's not particularly shiny. Let's say I wanted it shiny. Now I can take that material and we're going to add it to this model here. So what I'm going to do is, here's my blue sphere, and I can just literally drag and drop it on top of it. And there you go. You can see that I've now applied this to my scene. Okay. If you ever want to go back and make changes, you can always click back on it. Like maybe I want it to be a more of a light kind of aqua blue, or maybe I don't want it as shiny. Like I just want it more of a matte color like that. I could always go and make changes on the fly. Okay. Let's say I want to have a cube and I want it to be yellow, but I want it to be kind of like a semi-transparent, kind of like glass. So what I'm going to do is let's make a new material. I'm going to call it yellow material. And let's set the base map to yellow. Okay. And then I'm going to set, this is the RGB, which hopefully by this time, you guys should be like seniors or juniors. You guys should hopefully know that computers and devices use red, green, and blue light to make color. So this is the red amount, green amount, blue amount. And then there's this last one, which is alpha. Alpha is how transparent the color is. It goes from 0 to 255. 255 is like a solid color. What I'm going to do is actually set this to kind of a middle. Now, if I were to click and drag this onto my cube, you'll notice that we can't see through it, right? So it's not really semi-transparent. So what I'm actually going to do is under the surface options, we're going to change surface type from opaque, which is a solid. Opaque means you can't see through it, to transparent. And now you can see that this actually, I can see through it. Okay, so it's kind of this semi-transparent material. Okay. I'm gonna make another material that's kind of an emission material. Emission means it emits light as an object. And what I'm gonna do is right click, make a new material. It's called emission. All right, and I'm gonna go under base map again. Let's set this to kind of like a nice kind of light green, maybe. And I'm gonna, under here, I'm gonna set emission on, check mark that. And then we can set an emission map. And so what I could do is actually choose a color. And what this kind of does is it kind of gives it kind of a gradient. So you can kind of see how it's like really bright there and then it kind of gets darker. So if I apply that, it's kind of like the object is emitting light. So it's like very bright in the center and it's kind of coming around on all edges there. Okay. All right. So all of that's cool. What if I wanted to make a material that's really complex, that has a lot of texture to it, like sand or wood or something like that? Well, what I'm going to do is make a new material. And I'm going to call this wood material. And instead of using a color, although I could set this to like, brown or something, I could go under textures. Now, these are all flat 2D images. These are images I found online, and you can go to, something like Pexels or Unsplash or whatever image directory you want to use. And I could take the picture called wood. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it into this little box. When you drag it into this box, instead of using the values here, it's going to use the information of the image. Okay. In this case, the color we want to get from the image. So if I click and drag this here, see how this now looks kind of like wood, right? I got that wood texture, and maybe I'm going to make it a little shinier, like a shiny wood, like a lacquered wood. Okay. I'm going to take that material and let's drag it there. Okay. So I dragged that onto my box. I got a nice wooden box. Sometimes, let me open up. I'm just going to use Photopea if you don't mind. Normally I'd use Photoshop, but this is, I just wanted to load quickly. I have an image that has transparency in it. So if you go, if you look inside of the files that I gave you, like if you brought this particular, so there's a texture file called, I believe it's called Green Stripes. Okay. It's a GIF file or GIF, but it's GIF. And it actually has, you can see here how it's like transparent, right? You see that? Now, I'm going to apply, this is an image, like it's a GIF file, kind of like how I brought in that wood texture. All right. And what I'm going to do, oops, don't crash. All right. I'm going to make it, hopefully this doesn't crash. I'm going to make a new material. And I'm going to call this striped material. And a lot like the wood texture, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take that GIF file, which is here called Green Stripes, and I'm going to drag it into the base map like this. Now, when I do that, you'll notice that I do get the stripes, but we can still see the material underneath it. And in fact, actually, if I were to, put a yellow or something, you can see that when I apply this, you can see how it's applying the green image on top of the yellow color, right? But what if I wanted to keep this, let's say I didn't want this yellow, I just want to use the image and just have the, transparency like we have in Photoshop. What I could actually do is if I set this from surface type from opaque to transparent, you can see that anything that wasn't part of the image is now transparent. And I get kind of this really cool effect. You see that? I kind of have this kind of swirl effect. Okay. So you can do some really interesting things by having transparent backgrounds, like if you save it as a PNG or a GIF or something like that. So let me show you kind of like one more example. I have this image here. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I could model a tree, but the thing about modeling is for every model I have, it takes up space. The more models you have, the more polygons Unity has to calculate, and it starts to slow down your world a little bit. So here I have this picture. It's called tree.png. And what I'm actually going to do is just drag it to this plane. It's just a single plane that I made here in Unity, just like we did in the last video. And right now it's an image that's applied to this plane. But if I actually click on this, so what actually happened is this made a new material called tree. If I were to set this from opaque to transparent, what you can see is we can now see through this. Okay. And so what that means is, why would we want to do this? Well, in old school gaming, we would call this a flat because a single image takes up way less space than a modeled 3D, 3D modeled thing. And so I probably wouldn't do this like really close up, but if you're just doing something and it's like, okay, well, here it is at a distance, doesn't matter if it's a fully, 3D thing because it kind of looks nice, right? So this is why you might want to use an image as opposed to an actual model. And you can do that by using transparency. Now you'll notice if I go behind it, we can't see it anymore. That's because this is currently set to, this material is set to only render on the front face of the model. What I'm going to say is use both. And what that means is if I orbit around to the back, I should still be able to see it. Okay. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how we can make some really quick, easy materials, colors, or semi-transparent, or even textured things like, I have some other textures here like steel or metal or something that I could apply. Maybe I'm just going to grab that steel and apply it there. So you can see how that kind of changes the texture of this model, right? All right, I'm going to save and let's go to 6. Okay, let's talk about lighting. Okay, so this is my model as a wireframe. This is my scene or without any lighting. Okay, and to be honest, when you're sort of working and you're just laying stuff out and you're building, maybe you're adding materials, you don't really need to have lighting on. Lighting is only going to slow you down a little bit, but as you kind of get more and more complex, you're probably going to want some lighting in your scene. So what I'm going to do is click on this object that says shaded draw mode, and that is what my scene looks like with light. Okay. Now, at the moment, I have no lights in my scene, so it's kind of very dark. Okay. What I'm going to do is add lighting to my scene. So we can add 4 types of lights in our scene, and there's a slide about this. What I'm going to do is go under game object, light, and I'm going to go to directional light. Okay. Now, when I do that, you're going to see that my scene dramatically changes. This is what it, looked like before. This is what it looks like now. What this is what's called directional light. How directional light works is, think of it in other programs, sometimes it's referred to as the sun. And the way it works is that if we're outside, let's say you're outside of your house, you always have, because we live on Earth, we always have the sun, right? And the sun kind of comes and the light hits the clouds and it breaks apart and it hits everyone in the same area the same. What I mean by that is like if you went outside, both you and your friend would get the same amount of light. It's not like one of you would get more and one would get less, unless assuming you're both on the same plane and all that. So when you use a directional light, it applies to everything in your scene equally. It doesn't matter where the object is. Okay. Now you might have noticed I turned this off. I can do that by clicking on that little check mark right there. You used to be able to turn it off this way, but I guess you can't do that anymore. Some other things we can do is we can change the color of the light. So this is giving off white light. The sun in our sky and the lights, you know, like light bulbs, like the one that's like really, really bright right there, they give off white light. Okay, that's why light bulbs are painted white, because they're trying to mimic the sun. What I'm going to do is click on this. And if I change this to red, see how it's kind of tinting my color of my scene red? Okay. Or I could tint it green. Another thing we can do is the intensity of the light. The higher the intensity, the brighter your scene will look. So you can see that as I increase it, that I'm adding more and more light to my scene. Another thing you could do is you can have shadows. Okay. Defaultly, Unity doesn't really turn shadows on. And the reason why it doesn't do that is it slows your program down to have to calculate shadows. But I could do hard shadows. So I'm setting on hard shadows. Oops, what happened then? There we go. All right, so here's my object. You can see that, you know, the objects are casting shadows. Okay, this is the strength of your shadows, how intense they are. You can see when I turn them to 0 or off. This is when I'm on. One thing is, let's say you want to change the direction of your shadows. Right now, the way it's working is my light source is coming from here and it's going this way. So when it hits an object like that cube, the shadow goes in the opposite direction. If I want the shadow to go the other way, what I would have to do is actually rotate my light. So I'm going to go back. I have my light, my directional light here, and I'm going to rotate it the other way. And when I do that, you can see that it rotates the shadows. Okay. The more of an angle, the longer the shadow will be. Okay. All right, that's one type of light. I'm going to turn this one off. Next type of light I'm going to show you guys is what's called a point light. This is sometimes referred to as an omni light. The way I want you guys to think of a point light is I want you guys to think about like a candle. Okay. When you have a candle, your candle releases light, right? Like imagine you're in a dark room and then all the light goes out in all directions. Okay. This is why we call it an omnidirectional light, because it goes in all directions. It also, what happens is light particles decay and they die. So what that means is like, as soon as your light is emitted, let's say it's this nice thick line, the longer it kind of goes out, it kind of gets like lower and lower. And then it's like, oh no, I'm sad. Okay. And that goes in all directions. So what it means is the farther your object is from the light, the less light it's going to receive. Okay. So in other words, if I'm here and I have a candle and it's a dark room, if you're all the way on the other side of the room, you're probably not going to have the light hit you and you're going to be in darkness. Okay. So what I've done here is I've added a point light. I'm going to use the move tool. So you can move this around. And I'm going to place this kind of in the center. of my scene. I may even use, let's kind of, there we go. All right. So this is the light source. And it's going to go out in all directions. Okay. Once again, just like with direct, I have the ability to color this light and set an intensity. I'm going to set this to an intensity of maybe like 5. Okay. So when I do that, you can see that the light source gets a little brighter. Okay, than where it was when it was 1. The other thing that's going to affect this light is the range. Range is like the distance the light will go. So you can see that it's kind of affecting my light is like, lighting up kind of this area, but I want it to be higher. So what if I set the range to like 100? Okay. So you can see here how it's like I have this more intense light. I can also color this light a little bit, and it's affecting my scene. All right. Sorry, I had to take a break there. So you can see, that the Omni light is growing here. I might actually make this a little smaller. Like 65. Closer I get, you can see kind of reflection there. Let me put some shadows, give it a second. All right, so that's an Omni light. I'm gonna show you guys, I'm gonna turn this one off. And let's talk about an area light. So I just talked about how an Omni light is a light that goes in all directions, right? An area light is a light that goes in one direction, and it's actually based off of a shape, okay, an area. So in this case, this is the area right here. And what I'm going to do, so this is set to area, and I'm going to set, you can change the width. You could actually scale this larger or smaller if you want to. I believe so. There we go. I'm going to change the intensity to 5 and maybe the distance to like 25. Okay. All right, so the idea is that the light is coming out of this source, and you can point that light. I believe with this one, you can only see it when it's actually in game mode here. All right. All right, the last type of light, I'm having some weird issues here. I'm sorry. I'm kind of not as used to this modern kind of light. I'm going to get rid of this light. I'll turn off the directional. It's already off. Let's try out the spotlight. Okay. And the point of a spotlight is, once again, it's a light that goes in a direction. And I'm going to place this light directly over this character here. And I'm going to change the shape. Let's do the range. I'm going to make this 25. Okay. So you can see how this is the intensity. The range is how far it goes down. A longer range, which should make this a little bit dimmer, but at least 25, so it reaches here. We can keep increasing the intensity a little bit there. To play around with coloring. Okay. All right, so those are the major types of lighting, which is directional, point, area, and spotlight. Pretty sure. Let me see if I can change. I think there's an issue here because these are baked shadows. Maybe if I turn on shadows. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm having issues with the lighting here, but I'll look into that. Sorry about that. Okay. So another thing besides lighting, let's go to scenes. I'm going to go to exercise 6 here. And I have this scene here. Just going to add maybe all right, so here's my scene. And I have a world that I've built, and I want people to be able to explore that world. So what I'm going to do is I am going to have a camera, okay? Eventually, the camera is how, when we do VR, is how we're going to view things, okay? So what I'm going to do is we're going to add a camera. I already have a directional light in here. You can see the lighting being applied. I'm going to go under camera, okay? So here's my camera. You can tell, I'm just going to focus on this by zooming in on it. This is, the icon here means it's a camera, and you can kind of see this sort of projection, right? It's kind of going this way. This is the direction the camera is pointing. Okay. If you want to see what the camera is currently looking at in your scene, you can click on cameras and that should appear here. Okay. So you can kind of see, like, I'm looking at I'm kind of zoomed, or I'm pretty far from the scene because the camera is so far away. So I'm going to use the move tool and move it a little closer. You can see it's changing there. You look at my game view, that's what I'm currently looking at. So you can use the move tool on a camera. You can also rotate the camera a little bit too. So I'm going to literally use the rotation. I can rotate. I'm tilting it down. I'm tilting it up. Okay. And you can see when I look at my world here that I'm looking at that particular spot. Okay. I'm gonna kind of back away a little bit, maybe move it closer to the spaceship. So under cameras, there's a couple things you can kind of play around with. I can change the field of view. And when I do that, what it does is it actually makes the camera more or less zoomed in. Okay. We also have this clipping plane. What this means is how far can your camera see? And this is based on a depth level based on pixels. So what this means is if it's somewhere between 0.3 away from the camera, which is here, and 1,000, it could see this. If I were to lower this number under far, see how this kind of disappears because it's, I've said it has to be within 10 pixels, which is like, I don't know, like there. And this is not within that. So it kind of, we can't see anything. If I raise this up to like, I don't know, 100, you can see maybe even like, I don't know, 50, 25. You can start to see how like some of it's not being seen. So if you wanted to set up your world where like you can't see all the way out to infinity, you could set up a clipping plane like that. You could set up your camera to be orthographic, which means it doesn't move at all. The other thing that might be kind of useful is under output, there's this option that's display. Okay, see how it's set to display one. What I'm actually going to do is you can actually have more than one camera in your scene. So I'm going to put this into my camera and layer, or camera and lights and camera empty. And I'm going to rename it. I'll just call it like wide shot camera. Okay. And maybe just for the sake of argument, I want another camera that's like right in front of my of the spaceship. So let's add a second camera. I'm just going to move it and let's rotate it. Okay. And I'm going to set this other camera. Let's call this close up. All right. And I'm actually going to temporarily turn off. Oops, I didn't want to make that a subset. I'm just going to make that there. I'm going to take this one and turn it off. Actually, okay. Let's set this one. I'm going to set the first one to display 2, and I'm going to set this one to display 1. Oh, actually. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out the new way. This is how you can do it. See how actually here I can click on this and I can choose. So I'm going to switch that to my second camera. Okay. So this is my close-up camera. I'm just going to use the move tool to move it a little closer. Actually, it should be coming like this way. So I'm going to rotate it 90. There we go. Okay. So you can see I'm kind of in front of the camera or the object. Okay. So what's nice about this is I have two cameras. I have a wide shot and I have a close-up camera. Okay. And if I click on the wide shot, that's set to display 1. And if I click on the close-up, that's set to display 2. The reason why this is useful, if I click on my game mode, I'm looking out of display 1, but we can actually switch it also to display 2. Now, why this is useful is you can actually write code, C#, that would switch between cameras during the game or during when the world is running. So for instance, I could have this be my main camera and then say, oh, actually, why don't we switch to display 2? And then I get a different shot of the same world. So, let's do this one more time. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, I want a camera that points down on my object, my spaceship. Let's make another camera. I'll call this one top down camera. I'll put that in there too. Let's switch to that one. So right now it's like there. And I'm going to rotate this so it looks down on the ground. It should be like that. There we go. And I'm going to place this right over that. And I could even maybe zoom in a little. Something like that. Okay. And I'm going to set this to display 3. So we can go to display 1, display 2, display 3. Okay. Another thing that might be kind of useful to do is remember how we would have sets and subsets. And actually, I should have mentioned this with with lighting. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, I want this close-up camera, which is this one. I want it to always follow this model. So it's always like, here's the front of the spaceship. I always want it to be like there. So even when it moves like this. Does that make sense? So what I'm going to do is take this camera and I'm going to make it a subset of the spaceship. Okay. In other words, the spaceship is the parent. The camera is the child. And what that means is if I select the parent and I move it around, you can see that the camera moves with it. Okay. So this might be useful like in a game or something where there's a third. I mean, I know in VR, we're not supposed to have avatars per se, because that goes against the concept of VR and all that. But if I was building a game, it's like, well, maybe there's an avatar that we're following with the camera. This could be a good way to do that. Going back to the other scene with lighting. I think I got rid of the spotlight, but oops, except let's say I wanted to do the same thing. I have under my environment, here's the teddy bear. I could take that spotlight and maybe I'll rename it teddy bear spotlight. Drag it on top of that. Okay. And then if I move, oops, move the teddy bear, you can see that it moves the spotlight with it. Okay. All right, the last thing is I'll talk about, we talked about materials earlier at the beginning of this video, and we talked about like textures, right? So I'm going to make a new material. Or actually, what I'm going to do, I should make a material, but I'm going to show you a quick way to do this. I have under texture, I have these this checkerboard, right? And it's an image that's basically 2 by 2. It's a red and a light red. I'm going to take this and drag it here. And when I click on this, what is occurring? So this automatically created a material. Actually, I think it's just using this one. Yeah, let's just start from scratch. Let me back up. I'm going to make a new material. I'm going to call it my checker. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this checker texture to base map. You can see that's what I get. And I'm going to click on this and drag it here. Okay. So it's 2 by 2, just like the image, right? But I kind of want this to tile, which means I want it to repeat. So if you go under tiling, see how it's 1 by 1? So that means the image is 1 this way, 1 this way. If I were to say do 2, 1, what that means is it copied this twice, okay? And because the size of the object is the same size, it kind of squished it a little bit, right? So now it's kind of more like a rectangle as opposed to a square. But if I kept this, so now it's 2 by 2, so that means my design is two, 2 this way, 2 this way. So I could kind of use tiling to kind of create kind of, if I wanted more repeats of the same object, you could see how I'm kind of getting that. Okay, I'm going to lower this a little bit to like 5 by 5. Oops, not 15 by 5, but 5 by 5. The next thing is what's called offset. You might have noticed when I apply this that sometimes you have what's called a seam where it's like you can kind of see where something is matching up. So you can kind of play around with offsetting. So I'm offsetting this in the X direction. So I might want to see if I can get like this to line up with the edge. Now, default usually will, but in case you have issues where, there's some weird math involved, I could do the same thing here. Or maybe you really want this offset. Maybe I like it kind of having this kind of weird offset that's not quite perfect. So that's using the offset there. Okay, let's do that again. I'm going to make another material called, I forgot what I called this one, flower pattern. Okay, and I'm going to take this and let's drag and drop this into our base. Okay, so that gets me that. I'm going to drag this into here. Now that repeats it one time, but maybe I want to tile it over and over and over. So let's go under tiling and I'm going to set this to 5 by 5. And you can see it's going 5 by 5. Okay. If I wanted to kind of have kind of an offset there, so it's not so perfect, I could do it that way. Something like that. Okay. Or maybe I want it 10 by 10. It can be more of like a rug pattern kind of texture. All right, the last thing we're going to do is create what's called a skybox. Okay. To understand what a skybox is, let's go back really quickly to Blender. Now, let's imagine so I have this cube here. Let's imagine I could take this cube and I could blow it up so large that we are inside of the cube. So in other words, I'm inside of the cube right now and I'm like kind of looking around. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Like we're in the cube looking outward as opposed to looking in towards the cube. So if I were to take this cube and apply some sort of image to it, this might be a little weird when I do it, but let's try it out. Let me apply like a little image like that. Like a cityscape. All right, so you see how like there's this picture of a city and it's being applied to the cube. So it kind of feels like we're inside of it. That's kind of what we're going to be doing in Unity, okay? Where essentially we are going to place a cube around our world, and then we're going to be able to apply that to our world and then look outward at the cube, okay? All right, so let's make we're going to make that's what I'm looking for, a skybox. Okay. So I'm going to make a new material and I'm going to call this skybox material. And what I'm going to do is under shader, I'm going to change this to skybox. I'm going to change this to 6-sided. Okay. What this is going to allow me to do is make a cube. And I actually already have some images here. I found a panoramic and I divided it into 4. So I'm going to put this is the front. Back. Oh, I guess that should have been here. Switch them. Yeah. All right. Now I still need the base and the floor. I'm gonna put this on the floor. I'm gonna put this one at the top. Okay. All right, let's try to apply this. All right. So I'm gonna go under rendering lighting. Actually, sorry, let's go under rendering lighting. I'm gonna go under where it says environment here, and then I'm gonna click on skybox material. Now, there's already a default skybox here. And what I'm gonna do is click on that, and let's set this to, all right, I can drag. I don't know why it's not giving me the, usually when you click on this, it should pop up. There we go. And I'm gonna go find the one that I created, which is, where is it? Skybox material. All right, and there you go. There's my skybox. It is around my whole scene. Okay, so you might want to consider, something like that, so you can build sort of a more unique area around your world. Okay. All right. In the next video, I'm going to talk about applying components, more specifically C#. We'll talk about applying physics. Okay, and we'll talk about physics, and we'll talk about some very basics when it comes to colliders. Okay.